participating in our belittlement, propagating a view of smallness and hopelessness. So that, you know, the ecumenical vision that he was offering was framed around the vision of what he calls Oceania. And he kind of later works through the genealogies and histories of the South Seas, the South Pacific, Pacific Islands, Pacific Rim, Asia Pacific, Trans-Pacific, you know, different ways in which the interior Pacific Islanders are very small and subordinated players. And Oceania is meant to offer a bigger confederated vision in which the islanders have something very important to offer. Now, just a little bit more on that. Oceania, as such, invokes for Hau'ofa a new Pacific ecumene, a strategic mode of refiguring a university of address for Pacific Islanders for whom globalization discourse would hail them into market dependency, subaltern labor, and secular difference. Oceania, vast, watery, evocative, at core mysterious, recalls the Papua New Guinea pidgin term one salt wara for the Pacific as one salt water, which can be translated into one ocean, one people. And so this is Paley's way of, creating this hopeful, confederated, regional vision of Oceania. Now, in this book, that We Are the Ocean, which collects his essays on these visions of Oceania and some of his works in fiction and poetry, there's sort of this contradiction that is really crucial here. But he says at one point, the issue of what or who is a Pacific Islander can be overcome if we consider Oceania as comprising people, human beings with a common heritage and commitment, rather than members of just diverse nationalities and races. Oceania refers to a world of people connected to each other. So, you in Kaohsiung, we in San Francisco are connected by the ocean commons. And he says, this is a Paley, as far as I am concerned, anyone who has lived in our region and is committed to Oceania is an Oceanian. Okay, that's the capacious view. But 2 pages later in the same essay, The Ocean and Us, he says that on the eastern extremity of the region of Pacific, the Pacific, from Japan through the Philippines and Indonesia, countries which are adjacent to the Asian mainland, do not have oceanic cultures and therefore are not part of Oceania. This definition of our region that delineates us clearly from Asia is based on our own historical. Now, I think he's making a fatal error there, because you people have all heard of Orchid Island, and there's enough, there's linguistic evidence to tie certain Aboriginal peoples of Taiwan to the Polynesian and Austronesian languages, and then there's even DNA proofs that sort of link the. It may turn out that the center of the Oceania is in Taiwan, but I'm not going that far. But even if you had a Polynesian triangle, you'd have to have like an umbilical cord to the oceanic side of Taiwan. So, but Andy knows, I've been involved with the journal Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, and Inter-Asia framework is a way of pulling Taiwan, well, not only towards China and India, but towards a continental view. So it's very different way. This is where Taiwan becomes really interested in your schizophrenic poetics, where you're simultaneously continental Asian, but oceanic. And the Oceania is really interesting as a poetic configuration because it has a fluidity, a mobility, it has an ecological potentiality, because I was talking a lot about watersheds, the cities, the watershed you depend on, the ocean, and it was almost the gods punished me. They gave me more water. It turned Taiwan literally into is 7 feet of water, so very oceanic place, and you kind of protect mainland China from the full blow of the typhoon. But anyway, I think so. I think he's mistaken about the heritage and the history of Taiwan in relation to ocean. And of course, I mean, I know enough about Japan. When Japan went in the Meiji era, went north to Hokkaido, south to Okinawa, they had a very big vision of a kind of regional hegemony in the Pacific. That was, of course, the link to Hawaii, and Pearl Harbor went back, to 1860s, 1870s, and then even the whole thing of extending down to Australia. So their battle for hegemony in the Pacific against the U.S. was because they saw themselves as a kind of oceanic hegemon. They just not only wanted the mines of Manchuria, the timber of Korea and Taiwan, the plantations, but they had a very oceanic vision. So I don't want to get too euphoric about Oceania, but you need to consider it historically in all of its contradictions. But the other thing is, I think that we're really involved. We're in such advanced technological societies where our potential for damage is immense. Taiwan could be disastrously affected by global warming. If you think this typhoon is bad, imagine if you get every typhoon that would usually go to Japan now comes here, or the Philippines, or vice versa. And the same goes for smaller islands in the Pacific that are being inundated or transformed. So our responsibility towards ocean is immense. Our responsibility towards watersheds, water resources. So this is kind of the direction I'm heading in, but I think it's implicit in the way I'm using Oceania in this, bigger trans-Pacific kind of way. Now, the other thing I should say, and this is maybe a little, you might be even more skeptical about this than that, but it takes some development. But Gary Snyder has been an important theorist of poetry and poetics and trans-Pacific. His links to Chinese poetry, Han Shan, Zen, Japanese Zen Buddhism is very serious, long considered, but also his ties to Native American peoples is very deep and not just appropriative. I think it involves a very complicated learning from Native American peoples, and particularly peoples of the Pacific Northwest. And in this essay, Coming into the Watershed, realizing that the city is not divided from the countryside or the rural hinterlands, but the water resources of San Francisco come from way deep in the high Sierras. Many people live in the high Sierras or in the Big Sur. So San Francisco has this huge hinterlands, that connects the resources of the country to the city and vice versa. And then Snyder was trying to revision San Francisco as part of not just U.S., but as part of Shasta Nation, like the Shasta